Some people think the moon was torn from the Pacific Ocean when the Earth was formed. The human imagination has always been inspired by nature's perfection, objects of authentic beauty without the corruption of mankind. Such is the mystique of pearls, particularly the exotic black pearls, which come from the black-lipped oysters of remote South Sea lagoons. Ever since the Europeans first explored the Pacific, the islands of the South Seas have evoked ideas of paradise. But having spent 15 years traveling in some of the world's most remote regions, I've always doubted whether man's sense of value is truly satisfied by these fantasies. I'm in search of rare treasures of nature, and my journey is going to take me across and underneath one of the world's most extraordinary geographical features. The Pacific Ocean is larger than all the dry land of the planet. My journey to Polynesia goes via the Cook Islands, on through Fiji, but begins here on land which is some of the last to rise out of the sea, in the islands of Vanuatu. This is Yasur volcano on the island of Tanna. It's a place of such awesome strangeness that one can hardly not be reminded of our age-long struggle to find meaning and value in the planet's resources. As I look down into the crater, I feel I'm looking into the Earth's creation. The ancient Persians believed pearls came from the fiery sun. Old Chinese texts said pearls were created in the brains of dragons, and Brahmins wore pearls on amulets against fiery disasters. Man's always looked to the phenomena of nature for explanations of his own existence. He's worshipped the sun and revered the moon. The authentic, unsullied elements are central to the idea of paradise. This was to be a journey not just in search of jewels, but into the wealth of the elements. The people of Tanna are Melanesians. They originally migrated from the cradle of mankind in Africa. Nobody knows exactly how or when. Even today, Melanesians live in a state of nature. Every evening, the men get together for a communion with the earth. It's a narcotic drink called kava, and the ritual's an expression of reverence and taboo for the Earth Mother.
I can pass?
No.
I want to see the ceremony for myself, but I'm barred. Legend has it that kava originally grew from a woman's vagina, and so it's considered indecent for a woman to be there when it's drunk.
This is Narama.
Yeah.
Ah, but I can go and visit the women.
Yes, you can go.
Thank you. Graciously, I hope. I retreat and have to leave the kava to the camera. It's taboo for grown men to touch the root, so it's ritually prepared by circumcised boys who've not yet had sex. It's cleaned by the younger boys, then softened and chewed up by the teenagers. Its origin is innocuous enough. It's from the roots of a pepper shrub, but it's almost a religion here, an honored gift from nature. It has to go down all in one, except the last drop, which is returned to the gods of the earth. Below the volcano is Port Resolution, named by Captain Cook after his ship in 1774. The village chief has made friends with a sea cow, or dugong. It's another communion between the Pacific people and nature. Dugongs are the origin of the mermaid myth. The story goes that sailors a long way from home mistook these human-sized mammals for women. I can't help thinking that Captain Cook's men wouldn't have been fooled by this one's great-grandmother. But it's an example, I suppose, of how we insist on explaining the world in human terms. I arrived on Tanna on this ship, an oceanographic research vessel. Robert Louis Stevenson sailed these waters. He wrote, "To travel hopefully is a better thing than to arrive." That could well be my motto. I'm most at home when I'm traveling. Since my childhood in Africa, I've trekked through China, hunted crocodiles in New Guinea, and crossed Turkey on horseback. But this journey has a special challenge, leaving my natural home of Earth for the element of water. We were heading north along the fault line of the tectonic plate which creates the Pacific's ring of fire.
Let go starboard anchor.
People may have occupied all the world above the waves since it emerged from the sea, but most of our planet and its treasures are still underwater. I haven't been diving for 10 years, but with all the equipment on board the research vessel, I can take a refresher course on a shallow reef.
Now, Christina, since you haven't been diving for a long time, let me go through some of the basics for you again. Remember the first...
I've blown my credibility by turning up with my wetsuit on back to front, and dive master Bob Bowdy takes me back to square one.
The further you go down. Basic hand signals for diving. If I do that, that means, are you okay? You give me an okay sign. If you're not okay, say your ears are having trouble clearing, you would do this. That means, no, I'm not okay, and point to your ears or point to something. If you're low on air, you give me a signal like this. If you are out of air, a signal like this.
What are we going to find down there?
Well, this is a real pretty reef. There's lots of coral and lots of nice fish here. Sometimes we find large fish like the dog-toothed tuna come into this reef and feed. And we always find the reef fish and anemones and soft corals, hard corals, sea fans.
How about oysters?
Sometimes we see oysters and giant clams. In Vanuatu, we sometimes find the black-lipped pearl oyster or the gold-lipped pearl oyster.
Have you ever found pearls here?
I've never found pearls. We don't really look for things like that, but we just look at the animal themselves.
I'm a bit apprehensive. I don't know what to expect. I know that down there a mistake can kill, but I can't put it off.
Yes.
I haven't come all this way to cop
Put it
out.
on your face first and then slip the strap over the back. Make sure you get the hair out of it, okay? That's it.
Going down, I'm swimming all wrong. You're not supposed to use your arms, But this is another world where I'm not at home. I feel decidedly vulnerable. The fish are friendly, though, and Bob shows me how to hold onto the coral so I can play with them. There are no pearl oysters here, but the dive is useful practice. I need it because our next dive will be 3 times as deep and far more dangerous. We're on the island of Espiritu Santo, still in the Vanuatu group. Here, the conflicts of the modern world have literally dumped themselves in paradise. During the Second World War, the Americans prepared the Pacific Fleet here before the Battle of Guadalcanal. At the end of the war, they threw all their equipment into the sea, rather than leave it to be picked off at bargain prices by French scrap merchants. The beach is littered with the remnants of our violent civilization, but there was one piece of equipment they didn't mean to leave behind. A 120 feet below the surface lies the wreck of the United States ship, the President Coolidge. It's now home for colonies of fish, but in 1943 it was a troop carrier, bringing soldiers to take part in the Pacific landings against Japanese-held islands. Coming into harbour here at Espiritu Santo, it hit a mine laid by the Americans themselves to safeguard the bay. The ship's captain had ignored a warning that he was steaming in the wrong channel when disaster struck. The Coolidge then hit the fringing reef of Santo and sank, while all but one of her 5,000 passengers escaped with their lives. The wreck is an eerie experience, but I become so fascinated I forget to be scared. The wreck has laid almost untouched for 48 years, and the weapons and helmets of the fleeing troops lie in the silt.
Wow! How did you like that? That was stunning. It's just so huge down there. Oh, it is. It's a very large wreck.
And seeing all those rifles and helmets all over the decks, like they just dumped them as they ran.
They did. They had to literally just abandon ship. They didn't have much time at all.
The islands of Vanuatu are some of the youngest parts of the earth to rise from the sea. Paradoxically, the way of life there is one of the last to succumb to what we call civilization. The island of Malakula is home of the Nambas tribes, so called after a small leaf wrapping, which is little more than a fig leaf. I'd wanted to visit the big Nambas, but was told by the authorities that they've died out. The last one had been found dead last year, deep in the interior. Instead, we land near a village of small Nambas, who've taken on Western dress from time to time. These villagers have now come out of the bush, but they still revere ancient traditions and take me deep into the island to witness a celebration of the afterlife. Where are we going now?
We are going to a stone, what they call it, a living stone.
A living stone?
Yeah, where people died and they leave them there for 3 days. And then after 3 days, they take the skulls and the other parts of the body up to another burial ground up in the hills.
So this is where they left the bodies when they died?
Yeah, they left them up here this time.
Up here?
They believe that after 3 days, the spirit rises up. That's why they call it a living stone.
What do you do with the head?
They took the head and buried them up in the hills.
Oh, why is the skull so important? What do you do with it?
So that you can make it look like a man and then you dance with it.
So you make an effigy of a man, and the skull, you put it on?
To look like a man, a living man.
This is a dance to celebrate the dead. The chief told me, we don't mourn our dead, we dance for them. The skulls form the base of the headdress, which is adorned by pig tusks to show the status of the ancestors. When people ask me why I travel, I always say that, for me, journeys are explanations. This journey is in search of natural treasures, but what this community values most of all are its traditions. The migration of the Melanesians took them a further 500 miles eastward, sailing their canoes across the Pacific Ocean from Vanuatu to the islands of Fiji. I need to get further east from Fiji, to Taveuni, past the 180-degree meridian, the international date line, halfway round the world. I'm hitching a ride on this luxury yacht, which is taking its last trip before the hurricane season sets in. I hope I haven't left it too late. The line goes where?
And we'll just draw a line along here.
Due east.
Due east, right. And that is...
The yacht skipper, Carol Hayward, knows the region well. She needs to sail around Fiji. Between the 320 extinct volcanoes that make up the island group is a labyrinth of massive coral reefs.
We will plot a course up through our main ship channel, which is a bit of a laugh. It isn't really a main ship channel. It doesn't necessarily mean that...
It looks fairly straightforward on the chart, but we're having to head directly into the prevailing east wind. I begin to regret coming aboard. The voyage becomes one long hell of feeling miserably sick. I'm ashamed of my feebleness when I think that these seas saw the migration of whole societies in open canoes. So I go on deck where the wind and spray blast away my cobwebs. Next morning, I take advantage of the lull to read an American report of a journey through these waters just 150 years ago. Human sacrifices among the islanders were frequent. Victims were kept for a time to be fattened. Cannibalism wasn't confined to religious purposes, but practiced from habit and taste. It seems extraordinary that in this idyllic setting, the greatest praise bestowed on food was to say that it's as tender as a dead man. We're nearly there. 179 degrees, 49 minutes, and 1 second around the world. On the way to Taveuni, we stop off at Yathaka, where I'm told the villagers have a strange war trophy on the top of the hill. How did the canoe get into the cave?
In the olden days, our grandfathers and grandmothers, they fought with the Tongan people. They want to kill our high chief in Takondovi. They never killed our king, so they came back here and they were killed here at the beach there. They were all killed by the strong people of Agata. And they were put in their canoes, and our old grandfathers and grandmothers, and they carry the body with the canoes together right to the village. They make big lobo.
Oh, a ground oven.
Yeah, with big stones, and they put all the bodies inside, and they cook it and bury it,
And then?
and they eat it.
This is the only road in the world that crosses the 180-degree meridian, exactly halfway round the world from Greenwich. Here you can step out of today into tomorrow, stepping out of the history of the Pacific into its future. Our first stop since leaving Fiji on the date line is the main island in the Cook Group, Rarotonga. I've travelled exactly halfway round the world in search of exotic gems, but I haven't found pearls yet. I have found what passes for paradise in the modern South Pacific. When the missionaries first arrived, they were confused about the date line and didn't know you have to skip a day. The discovery that they'd been celebrating the Sabbath on Saturdays for 60 years or so must have come as quite a shock. Rarotonga is an island modelled on a miniature scale. It takes less than 3 hours to cycle right the way round it. The Cook Islanders first put up the Union Jack in 1888 to deter the French, who had their eyes on everything in the Pacific. They came under New Zealand administration until 1965, but now boast their own, somewhat diminutive parliament. At first sight, it seems to me that the European developers are intent on recreating paradise as they would like it. But I know that the story began long before the age of package holidays and draft lager. Who better to fill me in on the impact of the modern world than the former Prime Minister, Sir Tom Davies? Although Polynesian-born, Davies studied medicine in the States and lived there for 20 years.
Missionaries came from London, the London Missionary Society, which was the nonconformist, more the Presbyterian type of cult. Is that the right word? Does it sound right? They changed things that needed to be changed. They brought people up to a certain standard of ethics and morality. I think those were good things. Then, of course, they brought not the missionaries themselves, but those who came with them or immediately after them. They brought a lot of disease. In 1827, Rarotonga was decimated. There were not enough living to bury the dead. And it decimated not just us, Tahiti, Marquesas, and well, everywhere.
Was Polynesian culture doomed when the Europeans arrived?
I don't believe so. I think the basic aspects of a Polynesian culture will never change.
Hey, one, two.
This is what passes for Polynesian culture nowadays. They're training young dancers for tourist shows. How old is the youngest of these girls?
The youngest is 2.5 years old, and the eldest is 9. The rest of the little ones, the ages vary.
Is that a normal age to start dancing, about 2.5?
It's normal for little ones to start at a tender age here in the Cook Islands. Our dancing movements are very basic, and it really is a side-to-side hip movement.
How many movements are there?
2. It's a 1-2 beat. With your knees, you actually have to lower yourself with your feet together, and it's a matter of balance.
Yes.
And then you just shake side to side, left to right, left to right. It becomes just a 1-2 beat.
Davis told me he'd reintroduced this dancing to the islands after it had been long banned by Victorian missionaries, bringing back an authentic tradition and developing a custom from the past. But surely this is something different.
Dancing is no different than anybody else's dancing. To you, swinging the hips may be a terrible thing. To us, you dancing cheek to cheek and belly to belly and thigh to thigh is pretty bad too.
I'm not really convinced. This isn't anything but good-natured titillation, and Tom Davis wouldn't have it any other way either. Cook Islanders say it's vital to exploit all the island's natural assets to attract as many tourists as they can cater for. Nowadays, the way to make a living from the elements is to hire them out as a playground. Otherwise, there's nothing to eat. Do you think that because of tourism right through the South Pacific, that some of the kind of romance and adventure has gone?
Yes, in some areas it has. I think that it's not a bad thing for us to have got into. We're either going to accept that or go back to living off coconuts and fish, and not that that's bad, but generally living a very much lower standard of living. Sure, the tourists would like to see us in grass huts, but that's not good for us.
I take the point, but sitting about on a beach all day isn't my idea of fun. There's a strange sense of claustrophobia being hemmed in by vast expanses of ocean. Having cycled round the island, I'm determined to get across it. To do so, I'm going over that mountain. The Cook Islands' answer to Bob Marley is going to be my guide. He's an eccentric character called Pa.
Yeah, food for intake. It's all here on this valley here.
So, when was the next time that people started coming up here? As you might guess from his style, he's prone to making somewhat extravagant claims. He says the climb is so tough, he has to weigh up people's abilities to make it. He reckons I'm okay, but he's warned me it's a lot steeper later on.
If you walk slow, we won't get to the top. Come in, Christina.
We've come a long way from the simplicity of life in Vanuatu, or Fiji. Pa's an exuberant showman. He makes a living playing Tarzan for passing tourists. The plain fact is that the Cook Island economy depends entirely on this sort of enterprise. It may disappoint some people, but for my part, I'm happy to join in. I'm really enjoying the climb, even if my hands are raw.
Oh, now that was certainly a breath, yeah.
It's good.
What's the big rock down there, Pa?
Oh, that's the Needle Rock. It's called the Needle. The Polynesian people in ancient time, they used that rock. When they leave the island here, they make sure they sighted that rock for their voyage out to the sea to look for a new land.
Long before the exploration of the Pacific by European sailors, the ocean was crisscrossed by migrating parties of Polynesians in search of new islands to settle with expanding populations. 1,000 miles on from Rarotonga are scattered the islands of French Polynesia, around the main island Tahiti. My first landfall will be Raiatea. I feel I'm getting closer to the heart of Polynesia now. I'm also getting closer to the myth. The Europeans felt they'd found the summer Isles of Eden, with the beautiful people and the beautiful weather. And when you wanted pearls, you simply dived for them. I wonder. It's 5 in the morning when we disembark the inter-island steamer. It's not my best time of day, and it doesn't feel much like paradise. Maybe my expectations are too high. We're still a long way from the Pearl Lagoons, but I've heard of an adventurous French diving instructor who, incredibly, makes a feature of feeding sharks. Yes, that's right, feeding them with his hands. My only problem is the borrowed wetsuit is pink. Pink is for sissies. How can I face sea monsters if I'm dressed as a wimp? I ought to be worried, but Patrice's casual bonhomie puts me at ease.
Hi, Christina. How are you today?
Very well.
Come on.
Thank you, thank you. If we see any sharks?
Yes, I think we are going to the shark feeding today.
Are they as big as me?
Yes, a little bit more. This is a gray shark, the more aggressive, but if you know the shark, no problem. You can feed the shark with your hand, but you have to stay close to me.
Patrice warns me to keep my arms in. I don't need to be told twice. Patrice began feeding the reef fish and the local moray eels about 3 years ago. Moray have a bad reputation. Their inward curving teeth make it impossible for them to let go of their prey, whether it's a fish or a hand. These black-tip sharks are timid, no threat. It's the grey sharks that are dangerous. It's hard to count, but there are 15 or 20 sharks circling us. They're quite small, but it's chilling when they get so close you can see their eyes move. I'm beginning to feel a bit exposed. If I do a couple more dives with him, Patrice told me I'd be ready to feed the sharks myself, if my nerves held out. But he said it in the French way, that I'd got grande cuisse, which is something to do with balls. There may be plenty of sharks here, but no pearl oysters. I've got to get nearer my destination, across another 150 miles of ocean. Since we left Vanuatu 3,000 miles earlier and we sailed closer to the source of the treasured pearls, it seems to me the environment is getting more artificial, more reconstructed by man. Polynesia has always been an exotic attraction, particularly for European dreamers. But ironically, it's Polynesia that now imitates Europe. This is Papeete, the capital of French Polynesia, on the island of Tahiti. Astonishingly, the place is entirely dependent on European France for its economic survival. Basically, France's dream is not elemental paradise, but the opportunity to be a world power, so it bankrolls Polynesia in exchange for a site to test its nuclear weapons. But it's the environment that pays the real price.
We'd like to welcome you all aboard on behalf of Peter Wilcox, our captain, the crew of the Rainbow Warrior, and the Greenpeace officers from all around the world from which the crew are drawn. We have submitted a scientific sampling program to the French 2 months ago in early October. We have read in the press that we've been invited to Mororoa, but we are not interested in going if it is a tourist trip, if it is a Club Mediterranee.
As I arrived in Papeete, Greenpeace were preparing to leave on an expedition to check out the effects of 125 French nuclear tests on Mororoa Atoll. What will you be doing in Mororoa?
Taking biological samples, trying to find hotspots where leakage is already occurring and monitoring them, looking for cracks and fissures in the lagoon, and generally trying to find out as much about the facilities and the conditions which the environment is now suffering because of more than 120 underground tests at Mororoa. Cesium-134, which is radioactive, was found in particular spots, indicating that at localized points in the lagoon, radioactive leakage was occurring. And that this leakage may be occurring within 6 to 10 years. Now, the French have always said it would take hundreds, thousands of years before there was any problem. So we regard it as a matter of some urgency that we get out there, find to what extent that is actually happening, and try and make a judgment about what will be happening in the future.
The last time Greenpeace challenged nuclear testing in the Pacific, their ship was blown up in Auckland Harbour by French Secret Service agents. 2 weeks after I leave Greenpeace to continue my journey to the remote Pearl Atolls, 5 members of their team were arrested and expelled from Polynesia. Do the French want to keep us in ignorance? It's as though Greenpeace are thrown out of Eden for taking samples from a forbidden lagoon. Maybe knowledge is still the forbidden fruit. My image of Polynesia is getting tarnished by the modern world.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to land on the heap. Would you please bring your seat forward and make
One of the centres of pearl diving is off limits to shipping because it's in a military zone, and one can only visit at certain times of year, courtesy of the French authorities. To add to my disappointment, I have to take a plane to another pearl lagoon because it's beyond the itinerary of island steamers. Manihi is a ring of coral 13 miles long and 5 miles wide. The strip of land around the lagoon is less than 100 yards wide at any point. During the hurricane season, the waves crash right over it. Manihi's waters provide the unique nutrients and ideal water temperature for the Pinctada margaritifera, the black-lipped pearl oyster. Now, less than 500 people live here, but 30 years ago it was a thriving centre for annual expeditions of pearl divers from all over Polynesia. Overfishing of the oyster shell for mother of pearl has left the lagoon almost empty of the natural product.
We just put them along lines and tied from this part and this part.
Instead, there are farms growing oysters in which pearls will be cultured. The Swiss manager of one of the farms is Jérôme Defossé. What's the chances of finding a natural pearl?
A natural pearl, it's 1 over 10,000. It's very very little chance to find natural pearl.
Why?
Because the number of oysters have decreased due to over-diving. They stopped it in 1962. They didn't find many natural pearls, and the demand for mother of pearl decreased.
Due to?
other materials such as plastic, you know.
But are there still natural pearls out there in the lagoon?
Yes, but very few. There are still natural oysters, so you can find natural pearls.
This is one of 30 pearl farms around the shores of the lagoon. I find it quite bizarre and rather sad. Less than half the oysters survive long enough to be prepared for being grafted for pearl culture. They're strung off long lines and hung in the lagoon till they reach maturity.
Of the mantle coming from another oyster inside the
To
gonad.
feed our desire for natural treasure, we now resort to manufacture. This Japanese expert inserts a graft of a piece of mantle from a donor oyster which will stimulate the secretion of mother of pearl.
So he's going to remove the wedge, see, and put the retractor inside the oyster.
Instead of the traditional grain of sand, a nearly pearl-sized sphere ground from a special sort of river mussel is inserted into the oyster's sex gland.
And you remove the part of the mantle. Now he's going to cut the gonad. And make a small channel till the end of the gonad. Now he puts the part of the mantle he has taken from another oyster, which has been killed.
How old is an oyster like that?
Oh, more than 3 years. And now he's going to put the nucleus at the bottom of the, inside the gonad, but at the bottom of the channel is made in the gonad. This is an antiseptic. And it's done.
After the operation, the oysters recover in the protected nursery close to the shore. After a month, they'll be transferred to the deep lagoon. The process is far from infallible, but the best specimens can fetch up to £2,000. 35% of the oysters die, either during the operation or after. 25% reject the implant, and 10% produce pearls of unsaleable quality. Of the remaining 30%, only about 1.5 are grade A pearls.
These are nice pearls, yes.
What do you call these funny shaped
This is
rocks?
kishi. These are kishi, yes. There are 4 kishis here. Yeah.
What about this? It's got a sort of thing on top.
It's due to the inner shape of the gonad.
Which is the most valuable out of all that?
The most perfect is this one.
That
Yes.
little round one?
Yes.
Oh. Out in the lagoon, the strings of oysters are festooned from long lines anchored to buoys. They stay here for 1 or 2 years. It seems odd to me that in our attempts at our own vain decoration, we attach such value to objects that are manufactured in this deliberate, almost clinical way. Having plundered the resources of the Earth's natural wealth, we now resort to artifice and try to recreate miracles of nature, almost to order. After 3,000 miles, I've finally reached the goal I set out to find. You might say I travelled hopefully, and now I've arrived. If there's been some disenchantment on the way, not everything has been corrupted. At least the oysters are real oysters, and the water in which they grow, totally unique. After you've used an oyster once, can you get another pearl out of it again?
Yes, and sometimes, yes.
So the same one can go on for years?
Not for years, but twice sometimes. Just to show you, he's cutting the muscle.
Oh, goodness. Oh. Oh!
See the pearl inside the gunner?
I can.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's wonderful. Is that a grade A pearl?
Yes, it's a very nice one. It's very large.
That is just beautiful. My final satisfaction is that the pearls themselves are wonderful. This is a process man can interfere with, but which he cannot replace.